Welcome to the target and percentage ownership report for week 3 with Ricky Sanders at R Sanders DFS. I'm Jason Gilbo. Taking a look at some week 3 guys, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, and a pretty busy week of injuries. I think a lot's changed since you did this article, but obviously we'll touch on a lot of guys here that kind of do have injury implications.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to do it over again, it probably would look slightly differently. I mean, Devontae Freeman, I still love him in tournaments, but, I've just given a chart of 5 guys now. We know that Doug Martin's unlikely. We know that Adrian Peterson is done for a while. So just looking at this chart, I mean, Theo Riddick makes an appearance. Melvin Gordon makes an appearance. But I think there are plenty of more names that are going to go with a pretty high ownership, that I could have done a chart of about 15 to 20 running backs and projected some higher ownerships for some of those lesser guys.
Yeah, definitely. We can touch on a few at the end there. But looking at D'Angelo Williams, who jumped up in price a lot on FanDuel to 8,800. But obviously his last week before Bell comes back, Williams has just been a monster in terms of touches.
Yeah, I mean, he leads in carries. I think it's by at least 6 alone, and then he ranks 4th in catches for running back. So he's kind of running away with touches. He's averaging about 30 a week. So when it comes to cash games and really even on FanDuel, I mean, you know what kind of workload you're getting from him. The tough choice for me is looking at that and saying, do I D'Angelo Williams, do I Antonio Brown, or do I both? At least for some of the newer players, I know it looks like you don't like to take a running back and a receiver from the same team, but that offense is so concentrated between the two of them. Antonio Brown, by far the best wide receiver. D'Angelo Williams, by far the most involved running back. He looks great. So I think he's going to come with a high ownership. I was just arguing on Twitter about it. Someone was saying Ezekiel Elliott's going to be the chalk. I'm like, I don't know. I think people are going to pay up for those guaranteed touches. He's involved in the passing game. He's their goal line back. So D'Angelo Williams just has such a safe floor and really even a safe ceiling because he touches the ball so damn often and he's so explosive. So I love D'Angelo Williams in pretty much all formats once again. In what should be his final game. They're kind of running him into the ground like they don't really care about his long-term outcome, and why would they with Le'Veon Bell coming back?
Yeah, definitely. And it was a good point. I mean, because you got Brown right there, too, is in a great spot. Pairing both a wide receiver and a running back usually isn't the move to make, but this offense really is different. Mark Ingram, you talk about here on the Monday night game, going up against Falcons, pretty cheap across all 3 sites.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that he's only had 12 carries so far. He faced a Giants team that we thought he should have done better against, but the Saints offense just seems to work better at home, honestly. You look at Drew Brees' splits from last year. He had something like 20-plus touchdowns at home and only 9 on the road, so they just work better. I really like this matchup for Ingram, and I put that he's safe. I mean, at 5,900 on DraftKings, 11,000 on FantasyDraft, what everyone's going to do this week, at least in cash games, is try and spend up at a lot of places so they can punt with some of these guys filling in. So if you want to differentiate and you don't believe in some of these other backs, like for instance, I'm not a big Jerick McKinnon believer. So if you want to kind of differentiate and still stay safe, I think Mark Ingram makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I definitely do too, and he works well in the passing game at times as well. We haven't seen it a ton this year, but last year he was involved a little bit. I think ownership, I think he might be glossed over because, as you kind of pointed out, the touches really haven't been that heavy. And in that same game, you have Devonta Freeman pretty much at a similar price there for 100 less on DK.
Yeah, this is a tournament-only play, but there are a lot of encouraging signs here, I think. I mean, you look at the fantasy point total, and people are going to go, well, is Tevin Coleman the better back here? But it really doesn't pass the eye test. Not only has Freeman looked like the better back, but you look at snap counts. He's played at least exactly 36 in both of the first 2 games, while Coleman's went down from 32 to 30. If it wasn't for that 13-yard touchdown last week, Coleman wouldn't have been the better back, by the way. He's averaged more yards a carry, and he's still involved in the passing game. Coleman did have that 5-catch, 95-yard game. But I think in this matchup against the Saints, who led the league in yards per carry against last year, meaning opposing backs averaged almost 5 yards a carry against them, I do think this is a good spot for Freeman to kind of break out as the better, more talented back, show kind of what we saw in 2015. Playing 36 to 40 snaps against the Saints defense is awfully enticing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look here, pretty cheap price tag, especially in consideration to last year. And you're projecting him, I mean, less than 5% ownership or about that, especially for those playing those Monday night slates. So definitely a contrarian move there. Melvin Gordon, whether you like him or hate him, he's probably in play this week for most of us and going up against a pretty good matchup.
Yeah, I'm going to call it this week. We looked at Al Zeidenfeld's $1 million winning lineup last week. He had about 4 or 5 pretty obvious plays, then supplanted them with guys like Corey Coleman and Diggs. I think Melvin Gordon's in the $1 million winning lineup this week, even though he's going to be popular because there's just so much working for him. Not only is he the guy touching the ball pretty much all the time now, I mean, his snap count went from 23 to 51 in those 2 weeks. His touches went way up. He touched a career high 27 times last week, including 3 receptions after not catching any before the Danny Woodhead injury. So I think without Danny Woodhead, it's a whole different backfield. Plus, Vontae Davis is coming back, which should take away one of the receivers against a Colts defense that's been pretty bad against the run. I think they've allowed the absolute most fantasy points through 2 weeks. So Melvin Gordon involved everywhere, getting the goal line touches. For him, he's cheap. He's a workhorse. This is the week to use him.
Yeah, I definitely like him a lot. I think cash games, I think he's going to be probably one of the chalkier running backs. And then we start to dive into the injury situations. Obviously, Theo Riddick had a big week 1, silent in week 2. But with Amir Abdullah out, I mean, he's due for a little bit of an increase in workload.
Yeah, I'm kind of willing to throw out last week, to be honest with you. I mean, the Titans allowed the fewest receptions to running backs last year, and just a very good defense against the position. So you kind of expected a week from Riddick that wasn't a week anyone should have been targeting him really in daily fantasy outside of maybe a tournament that he's such a good receiver that he could get one and take it to the house against a good defense. But this week the matchup steps up a little bit in terms of, their susceptibility to a back like him. I think they'll try and work to get him more involved. And officially, Amir Abdullah on injury reserve. So it's going to be either a power back running into the heart of this Packers defense or them getting creative with Riddick. Again, Riddick caught 80 passes last year, was RB18 in the format. So he's only going up from here. I mean, if RB18 is the floor, I mean, what could we be looking at here? In my opinion, we could be looking at a 90, 95 catch type running back with all the play he's going to get. He was just a third down back last year. Now you add in some early down touches. You add in pretty much all the, passing downs that Abdullah was playing, and you get really a guy who's worth way more than just 9,700 on Fantasy Draft.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those PPR sites, I mean, that's where you're kind of looking for Riddick this week, matchup against the Packers. And you got to anticipate that the Lions are going to have to be trying to play keep up at least. I think Rodgers is probably going to be leading the way for most of that game. Jumping into wideouts here, Antonio Brown, kind of the guy this week. You have him kind of also paired up with Julio Jones as really the top 2 options.
Yeah, the only concern with Julio Jones is his health. But he's supposed to be fine. He left at the end of last game. It wasn't what was nagging him earlier in the season, which is nice. But I think the way that a lot of people are going to attack this week, and rightfully so, is spend down at running back. So I think the ownership percentage is going to be there in these guys at the wide receiver position. Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, they make a lot of sense if you compare them with the Charles Sims, the Theo Riddicks, the Melvin Gordons of the world. And especially if you can go cheap at tight end, I mean, you can use multiple of these guys. They're all in great spots. So I project Antonio Brown, the best wide receiver on earth, even at, slightly more than Julio Jones to be the highest owned. And I think Jones is next. I would play either, both of them pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue. Both their matchups pretty solid. Allen Robinson, who I know you like this week a ton. I do as well. 2 tough matchups in his first 2 weeks, but now kind of things could shake up for that big 2015 type game.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's worried about him, just let me give you one word: don't. I mean, don't be worried about him. He's been shadowed by a healthy Sam Shields, who wasn't there last week for Diggs. So people are going to say, Diggs went off against the Packers. Well, yeah, because he didn't have to deal with their best corner. Allen Robinson did, and he was still targeted 15 times against him. And then last week, San Diego arguably has the best duo of corners, maybe, with the Broncos and with the Cardinals. Those are the 3 toughest pairs of corners. So Robinson's dealt with 2 of the his worst matchups of the entire year, and now he's getting one. Corey Coleman dominated this Ravens defense last week, and we definitely think Allen Robinson's more talented than he is. So at a price tag that's much more affordable than the guys at the top. I mean, if you're trying to spend up elsewhere, if you want to get a Delaney Walker at tight end, if you want to get a Jordan Reed, and you don't want to use those top two receivers, I mean, I think Robinson's going to give you a similar, if not better, production to the likes of Julio Jones. I love him this week.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, you get quite the discount there from those two top guys. And then also, I mean, kind of in that similar price range, dropping down just a little bit, Jarvis Landry, good spot for the Dolphins passing game against the Browns.
Yeah, and after I wrote this, I've been doing more research into this one. I think Landry is fine for cash, but I think there is a little bit of reason to worry about him, which kind of puts him more into the tournament play for me, is that Joe Hayden has graded back up to the Joe Hayden that we know so far this year. He's been pretty dominant. And when he's healthy, we know he has the potential. Now, he had a bad year last year, but he only played in 5 games, and in 3 of those games, he shadowed. So I'm a little worried that Landry's going to get shadowed by Hayden, and it's going to be the other Dolphins guys who go off. So I do think, he's going to be targeted enough that he'll still come through with his 4 or 5 catches at the very least. I'm just a little worried now that it's going to be more in the 4 or 5 catch range than when I initially looked at this matchup and thought, this could be 8 to 10 catches. So I think he could be sliding into the tournament range for me, even though I considered him safe. I do think he has a safe, okay floor, but I'm kind of leaning away from him since I've written this article.
What about Devontae Parker, who, I mean, came off last week? Obviously, that game they were chasing for much of it. Could he be kind of a realistic swerve?
Yeah, I think Parker and Stills are going to be guys that are going to be in some of my tournament lineups as well. Definitely Parker, because Stills is kind of a guy that if he doesn't beat him deep, he's going to be pretty much worthless. But I think Parker is kind of a guy who can mix in all the routes. And if Hayden's busy shadowing Landry, then, we're not worried about any of the other corners. That's literally the only guy we're worried about on this entire defense. The fact that they don't have a running game is pretty huge. I mean, if it's a mix of Ajayi and Drake, I think they're going to definitely struggle. So it's going to be Tannehill throwing, 40 plus times. And I think Parker's going to be heavily involved, especially if he can't find a way to get it to Landry. One of these Dolphins receivers is going to have a monster week. It's just a question of which one.
Yeah. I'm looking at Tyler Lockett here. Seattle kind of in a banged-up situation with a few of their guys. And you're talking about Lockett here kind of maybe benefiting from some of that.
Yeah, I think Baldwin says he's going to be okay, but I'm not sure with a knee injury that we can really expect it. And I do think even a hampered Russell Wilson, or maybe even it's better that we have a hampered Russell Wilson in this matchup, is going to have a big day. So I like the wide receivers here. You look at that snap count last week. Lockett played 62, which is a pretty hefty amount for a guy who we kind of rely on for big plays. He caught all 4 of his targets. By comparison, Baldwin 71, Kirsch 70. And if we're looking at kind of a hampered Baldwin, maybe we expect those snaps to go down this week. So I think Lockett could play, a starting amount of snaps. The guy's got crazy speed, and Wilson has the arm to find him. So I think with that 100% catch success rate last week, they were clearly on the same page with Russell Wilson. Now, if his workload ticks up or he sees an uptick in targets, I think he's pretty safe, and he's really, really cheap everywhere. So I really like him as a guy with kind of a safe floor.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're looking to kind of pay up at other options, I think a third cheap wide receiver is going to be where you're going to be looking, and Lockett's definitely a viable option. Jumping into tight ends here, you got a couple of pay-up options with Jordan Reed going up against the Giants defense that has looked better, but we still know against tight ends they're pretty susceptible.
Yeah, I was going to say last year, Reed 8 for 98 against this defense. Giants allowed the second most fantasy points to tight ends. So if you have the salary to spend up for him, I think that's the way to go. And we didn't mention in the wide receiver section, but I think some of those Tennessee cheap wide receivers are the way to do it if you're going to do that. I mean, if you got to go 2 cheap wide receivers, go Lockett and someone like Rashard Matthews or Tajay Sharp, because we'll get to Delaney Walker, who I actually think I prefer to Olsen this week again. This Oakland defense has allowed 808 passing yards in 2 weeks, so they're pretty much historically bad at this point. Someone in the Tennessee passing game is going to be able to take advantage. The question is Sean Smith as bad as he showed? Can he shut down a guy like Tajay Sharp, who's kind of a younger receiver instead of a polished guy like Brandon Cooks, who burned him? So that'll be an interesting matchup to watch. But I do think Reed's the elite guy. I think he's got the safest floor of them all. But if you want to save a little, Olsen's viable as always, and Delaney Walker's kind of a guy with some really intriguing upside and floor.
Yeah, definitely. You look at Walker is the cheaper option out of those three guys. So, I mean, I do bump him up a lot this week, and you project him to be the highest owned out of those three, which I do agree with. In terms of value, you got Antonio Gates here. I think for me, the FanDuel price is a little bit, I'm not really loving it, but the other two sites I definitely like quite a bit.
Yeah, I think he's tournament on FanDuel because of that price. The issue with him is he's definitely lost a step. I mean, he scored the touchdown last week, which gave him a decently respectable day. But again, I worry about how poorly he graded in week one, how slow he's looked, how he only caught 3 passes last week is a little concerning. I think this is an aging guy who still Phillip Rivers will rely on those intermediate routes. But he's still a little bit of a scary proposition because this isn't the Antonio Gates of his prime. This is what pretty much everything he's got left, which is okay, but it's not great. So I think even in his good weeks, that's kind of what we can expect for him. He's not going to break any long runs or anything like that. But if they, happen to target him in the red zone, he scores, you're happy with it. I don't think he has too many of those 2 touchdown games left. That being said, with Vontae Davis healthy in this game, they're going to take away one of the receivers. I think Gordon should have a good day. But in the red zone, if he gets stuffed, they'll go with a tight package, and I do think Gates is at least going to see, 1, maybe 2, maybe even more red zone targets for that reason. Even if they go a few wide, I think Gates is the red zone target, which is why I've got him in the value section here, even though I'm not in love with the talent.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think at those other sites there, it's kind of worth a look because, as you mentioned, the red zone targets, should be there. Jesse James, you got here as another value. Obviously, caught that touchdown last week. Was kind of a fan favorite, or has been for the first few weeks here. Pretty cheap, really, across all 3 sites still.
Yeah, because he's cheap, and we know that Roethlisberger likes to rely on the tight ends. It really makes a lot of sense. I know the line is close. I think Pittsburgh's a 3.5-point favorite, but I kind of see it differently. I really think, even with the way that Carson Wentz has played so far, that this is a game where Pittsburgh blows him out of the water. I think Roethlisberger's going to have a monster game. I think you can use him in tournaments. I think one of the ways I'm going to go is having, at least 2 or 3 skill position players in some of my lineups. So Jesse James, Antonio Brown, Jesse James, D'Angelo Williams. I think James catches enough passes for cash games if you want to spend down at the position, which I don't really recommend this week with all the others, receivers in good spots. But for tournaments, I think James has, 6-7 reception upside, and if he scores a touchdown, you're definitely happy with what you get from it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially at those prices. I mean, you look here, he is cheaper than Gates as well. So if you do need that extra 1,000, I think he's a viable option to pivot down to. We kind of brought up injuries a little earlier. If you were kind of to redo this one, any couple names you want to throw out there to wrap it up?
I think for tournaments, I would add in Matt Asiata. I think a lot of people are going to be on McKinnon, and I kind of looked at the numbers, and when he's carried the ball 10-plus times, he's only averaged 77 yards, only 2.5 catches, and he hasn't scored a touchdown. So I think Asiata is going to be the guy that gets the goal line work, and we've seen him kind of have those 3-touchdown-type games. So with the way Bradford looked last week, the way he was connecting with Diggs, if they're moving the ball down the field, he's going to be the one to finish it. I do think Charles Sims is worthy of consideration. I do think Philip Dorsett, with the injury to Moncrief, is going to have a nice game. So there are a lot of guys I would add here. I would watch those injuries all week because they seem to really be affecting him. And Nunwa is another one. If he plays and Brandon Marshall doesn't, I think that kind of hurts Decker. Decker kind of benefits from having the 1-2. So I think a Nunwa would kind of be the same way, where he'd go into that Decker role, and we could see another nice week from him.
Yeah, definitely some good points there. So be sure to stay on top of those injuries. Definitely head over to dailyfantasycafe.com and check out all our great tools and content.